Nolan Bray never expected to find his wife Selena in another man's home, especially not their reclusive neighbor Calden Mire's, and especially not when he had only entered by mistake. What began as a harmless mix-up on a rainy night unraveled into a chilling mystery that exposed betrayal, hidden identities, and a truth more disturbing than he could ever imagine. As Nolan searched for answers, he discovered that Selena hadn't just vanished. She had walked willingly into something far more dangerous, and Calden Mire? He was never who he said he was. It was a quiet Thursday evening in the suburban town of Hollow Pines, a place where every street looked like the last, with identical houses lined up like copy-paste images. The neighborhood had always been safe, peaceful, and predictable, almost too perfect. That evening, though, something out of the ordinary was about to unfold. Nolan Bray, a 38-year-old software engineer, had been away on a 2-day work trip to a tech conference 2 states over. The journey back had been long and uneventful, just miles of wet asphalt and endless radio chatter. As he approached his home around 7:45 p.m., rain began to pour heavily, washing over his windshield and turning the world outside into a blurry, watercolor painting. Streetlights shimmered in the puddles, and thunder rolled in the distance. He turned onto Autumn Grove Lane, the familiar cul-de-sac where he had lived for the past 5 years with his wife, Selena. Their house was the third one from the corner, beige siding with a blue door and 2 potted plants framing the entrance. Nolan pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching softly over the wet gravel, and sighed with relief. He was home, or so he thought. He grabbed his suitcase from the trunk, pulled his jacket over his head, and ran toward the porch. The rain fell in sheets now, soaking him to the bone within seconds. As he reached the door, he instinctively reached under the left flower pot for the spare key, just as he had done countless times before. His fingers found the small plastic case. He unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside without a second thought. Almost immediately, he noticed something was off. The smell hit him first. Not the faint lavender scent Selena always used, but something muskier, almost spicy. It didn't smell like home. He paused at the doorway, water dripping from his sleeves, and looked around. The hallway rug was unfamiliar. Instead of the navy and white pattern he remembered, this one had bold stripes of red and gold. The lighting was warmer too, casting soft amber hues across the wooden floor. His brow furrowed. Had Selena redecorated while he was gone? He wheeled his suitcase further inside, shoes squeaking slightly on the floor, and glanced toward the living room. The furniture looked different. Similar in style, yes, but the couch was darker, the curtains drawn tightly shut. A few framed pictures hung on the wall, but they weren't of him or Selena. Instead, they were scenic landscapes, abstract paintings, and a photo of a man with a dog. Nolan had never seen that man before. Still, he hesitated to panic. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe the rain had thrown him off. Maybe this was his house and he just wasn't recognizing it after 2 exhausting days away. But that comforting self-reassurance vanished the moment he noticed something that sent a shiver down his spine. A pair of black heels near the coffee table. He recognized them instantly. They belonged to Selena. She had worn them last week to a dinner party. He remembered because they gave her blisters and she had sworn never to wear them again. His heart started to race. Why were Selena's shoes here, in a house that didn't feel like his? He walked toward the kitchen in slow, deliberate steps. On the counter, 2 steaming mugs of coffee sat side by side. One of them had a clear lipstick mark on the rim. The same color Selena always wore, a distinct coral pink shade. The other mug had the word "boss" printed in bold black letters. His eyes scanned the room. There was a man's jacket hanging over a kitchen chair. A large, expensive-looking watch lay next to the sink. Nolan's throat went dry. He turned around slowly, retracing his steps to the hallway. He reached the front door, opened it, and stepped back into the rain. It was still coming down hard, but now it felt colder, sharper. He looked up at the house's number. It wasn't his. His house was next door. He had entered the wrong house. But the real question wasn't how he got there. It was, why was his wife already inside? Nolan stood frozen in the rain, staring at the number plate nailed just above the doorframe. The digits glared back at him, almost mocking his mistake. It wasn't his house. He had walked into his neighbor Calden Mire's home without realizing it. The layout was nearly identical, the porch almost a mirror image, and in the confusion of the storm he had blindly followed muscle memory. But that didn't explain what he saw inside. That didn't explain Selena's heels by the couch, or her lipstick on that coffee mug. He backed away slowly, eyes flicking between Calden's porch and his own home next door. His car still sat in the driveway of the wrong house, its windshield fogged, engine clicking softly as it cooled. The rain soaked through his jacket, his shirt clinging uncomfortably to his back, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing. Had Selena come over to Calden's house? Why? And with him not even home yet? Without thinking, he moved to his actual house and unlocked the front door with shaking hands. The interior greeted him with a cold emptiness. No lights were on, no sign of Selena. He stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor, suitcase abandoned at the threshold. He called out her name instinctively, but there was no answer. The silence only deepened the pit in his stomach. The kitchen was spotless. No signs of dinner being made. Her keys weren't on the counter. Her purse wasn't in its usual place. The house felt untouched, as if no one had been in it for at least a day. Nolan moved to the bedroom and opened the closet. Most of her clothes were still there, but a few pieces were missing. Her black trench coat, the red heels she wore to formal events, and her overnight bag. The kind she used when she stayed with her sister or traveled alone. He sank onto the edge of the bed, heart pounding. Could she have left on her own? Had she gone somewhere? Or was she staying next door? With Calden. His mind replayed the few interactions he'd had with the man. Calden Mire was new to the neighborhood, having moved in just over 4 months ago. He kept to himself, rarely seen except in the early mornings or late evenings. He was polite, but distant, his words brief, his smile forced. Nolan had only spoken to him twice, both times about garbage collection or parking arrangements. Selena had never mentioned him, not once, at least not to Nolan. But now, details he had never noticed before started to come together in his mind. He remembered a time when Selena had been unusually dressed up for a book club meeting. Another time, she had received a call late at night and stepped out to get some air. And there had been a week when she seemed distracted, glued to her phone, always smiling at her screen before locking it quickly when Nolan walked in. Until now, he hadn't given any of it a second thought. But the shoes, the coffee mug, the man's jacket, the photo of her and Calden together on his mantle. That was what sealed it. A framed photograph, clearly taken indoors, of Selena and Calden standing close together, smiling. She wore the same coral lipstick, and he had his arm around her back. It looked intimate, comfortable, familiar. Nolan's thoughts turned darker. How long had this been going on? Was this just a recent affair, or had something been happening under his nose for months? And why had she lied? More than anything, why? Was she at Calden's house when she knew her husband was returning that evening? His gaze shifted to the clock on the wall. It was nearing 9 p.m., and still no sign of her. He tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His fingers trembled as he put the device down. He didn't know what was worse, the possibility of betrayal or the creeping fear that something was seriously, terribly wrong. Nolan barely slept that night. He lay on his side, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling as shadows from the streetlights slid across it like restless ghosts. The rain eventually stopped, but the storm inside his mind refused to quiet. Every sound made him flinch. The creak of the pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, all reminders that time was passing and Selena was still missing. At sunrise, he got up and stood at the front window, watching Calden's house like a hawk. It looked normal. Too normal. Curtains drawn, no movement inside. The same black car parked in the driveway. No sign of Selena. No lights turned on. He checked his phone. Still no messages, no missed calls. He tried calling her again, straight to voicemail. He debated going back over to the house. He had no real excuse. He couldn't exactly tell someone he'd broken into his neighbor's house the night before, even by accident. Still, he had to know. The thought of that photo, of her shoes, the coffee mugs, they swirled in his mind like a vortex pulling him under. By noon, curiosity overwhelmed his hesitation. He walked over and rang the doorbell. Once, twice, no answer. He knocked, waited, and knocked again. Nothing. Then he moved around the side, peeking through the narrow space between the blinds and the window frame. The house looked exactly as he had left it, untouched, silent. But then, he noticed something strange. The kitchen table, where the 2 mugs had been the night before, was completely bare. Not a cup in sight. The floor, once marked with faint footprints and a few water spots from damp shoes, had been wiped clean. No shoes near the couch, no jacket on the chair, as if no one had been there at all. He stepped back from the window, heart hammering in his chest. Had someone cleaned it? Up in the middle of the night? Was Selena still there? Was Calden hiding her? The paranoia was creeping in faster now, curling into his spine and tightening in his chest. Later that evening, just before sunset, something told Nolan to try again. This time, he walked around the back of Calden's house, sticking close to the fence line like a thief. He didn't know what he was looking for. Confirmation, maybe. Or something that would make the chaos in his head stop spinning. That's when he saw it. Through the back window, in the corner of the living room, a tall floor lamp had been knocked over. A side table was on its side, and a glass vase had shattered across the floor. Something had definitely happened in there. Something violent. Nolan felt a wave of nausea rise up his throat. This wasn't just infidelity. This was something else. Something dangerous. He raced home, hands shaking, and called the police. His voice was calm, but urgent. He didn't say he'd been inside before. He just told them something looked wrong, that his neighbor hadn't been seen, and that his wife was missing. The officers arrived within 30 minutes. They knocked, called out, and finally entered using a warrant granted through emergency circumstances. Nolan watched from his own porch as the officers disappeared into Calden's home. For a while, everything was quiet. Then one of them stepped outside and spoke into his radio. Moments later, more police arrived. Then crime scene techs. Then an unmarked car. Yellow tape went up. The quiet cul-de-sac of Hollow Pines was now buzzing with flashing lights and murmured voices. Something had been found. An officer approached Nolan and began asking questions. He answered everything honestly, except for the part about entering the house the night before. Something inside told him to keep that detail to himself. At least for now, because what really mattered was this: Selena was gone, and Calden was nowhere to be found. The entire neighborhood of Hollow Pines had changed overnight. The air was no longer filled with the scent of fresh grass and early morning coffee, but was instead saturated with unease. Police cruisers lingered on Autumn Grove Lane like silent sentinels, their lights flashing occasionally, a warning to all that something terrible had surfaced. Neighbors stood behind curtains, whispering, speculating, watching the officers go in and out of Calden Mire's house with boxes, bags, and cameras. Nolan sat inside his own home, staring blankly at the wall. Every so often, he glanced at his phone, hoping for a miracle. A text from Selena, a missed call, anything that might suggest she was safe. But the screen remained dark. Her phone was still off, unreachable. He had already told the officers everything he could without incriminating himself. He said she was supposed to be home that night, but never returned. He admitted he had knocked on Calden's door, that he hadn't seen either of them since the night before. That was all. Detectives searched Calden's house thoroughly. In the kitchen, they found 2 empty coffee mugs in the dishwasher, still damp from a recent rinse cycle, a lipstick-stained napkin in the trash. In the living room, signs of a struggle, a broken lamp, scratches on the wall, a torn curtain. But there was no blood, no bodies, no witnesses. It was as if the occupants had simply vanished into thin air. A day later, the police found Selena's phone. It had been tucked between the couch cushions, almost hidden. It had been wiped clean. No messages, no photos, no call logs. Forensics confirmed the memory had been intentionally erased. Calden's laptop was gone, as was his cell phone. His car, a black 2017 sedan, had not been seen since the night of the storm. A BOLO was issued, but no sightings came in. The media picked up the story, and soon it spread beyond Hollow Pines. Headlines ran with phrases like, "Suburban disappearance," "Married woman vanishes after neighbor visit," and "The man with no past." News vans parked along the street for days, their reporters eager for any scrap of new information. But nothing came. No trace of either of them. Then, a week later, a discovery changed everything. A hiker walking through a wooded trail near the edge of Hollow Pines stumbled upon a torn duffel bag, partially buried under a pile of leaves and branches. Inside were burned scraps of clothing, charred fabric, melted buttons, and singed leather. Among the ashes was a watch with Selena's initials engraved on the back. It was the anniversary gift Nolan had given her 2 years ago. Police cordoned off the area immediately and began combing the woods. A search team brought in dogs, drones, and excavation equipment. What they found only deepened the mystery. A shredded photograph of Calden and Selena, partially burned but recognizable, was discovered inside a nearby fire pit. And underneath, a rotting log, a marriage certificate, Nolan and Selena's, torn in half, the ink smeared from water and soot. For Nolan, it was like falling into a bottomless hole. The evidence seemed to suggest that Selena had been trying to leave her old life behind, or someone had wanted to erase it completely. Either way, it was clear something sinister had taken place in those woods. But still, there were no bodies, no confirmed signs of death, only shadows and fragments, left behind like puzzle pieces from a picture no one could fully see. The police held a press conference, stating the case was now being treated as a potential abduction, and foul play was suspected. Calden Mire became the prime suspect in both Selena's disappearance and whatever had occurred in that house. But there was a problem. Calden wasn't Calden. His identity had been fabricated. There was no record of him before he moved to Hollow Pines. No history, no family, no digital footprint. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere, and now, just as easily, he had vanished. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation into Selena's disappearance became colder with each passing day. Despite nationwide alerts and extensive searches, neither she nor Calden Mire were ever found. The community of Hollow Pines returned to a fragile state of normalcy, though a thin layer of fear clung to everything like dust. People locked their doors earlier, avoided eye contact with neighbors, and looked twice at strangers passing by. For Nolan, the days blurred together. He stopped going to work. His friends tried calling, but he ignored them. The only thing he seemed capable of was reliving the events of that night. The wrong turn into the wrong house, the shoes by the couch, the lipstick on the mug. He walked through his home like a ghost, sometimes staring at her photo for hours, wondering if it was all his fault, wondering if he had missed the signs for too long. Then, 6 months after her disappearance, something strange happened. A letter arrived at Nolan's door. No return address, no postage stamp, just his name on the front in thin black ink. The envelope was old-fashioned, the kind used for invitations or formal announcements. Inside was a single piece of folded paper. It read only one sentence. "You should have never come back early." Nolan's hands trembled as he read the words again and again. His stomach turned to ice. Someone had been watching. Someone had known. He wasn't supposed to be home that night, that someone had planned for him to be gone. He took the letter to the police, but the envelope held no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing useful. Just like everything else in the case, it offered no answers, only more questions. Detectives reopened parts of the investigation with renewed suspicion. Perhaps Nolan hadn't just stumbled upon an affair. Maybe he had interrupted something. Far more calculated. A plan. One that relied on his absence. They revisited Calden's past, or what little of it existed. Every trace led to a dead end. The name had been borrowed from a man who died overseas years ago. His ID, paperwork, even his tax records had been meticulously crafted. Whoever Calden really was, he had taken on a false identity with extreme precision. But why? And how did Selena fit into it? There were theories. Some believed Selena had been manipulated, tricked into helping Calden cover up a larger crime. Others thought she had willingly run away, possibly involved in something she couldn't escape. And a few, including some officers quietly working, the case believed she had been a victim, that whatever Calden's true intentions were, they had gone too far. Nolan, however, had his own theory. In the stillness of his house, he began going through every file, notebook, and digital trail Selena had left behind. One night, he found something strange on an old USB drive tucked away in her desk drawer. Among her work documents and old photos was a folder labeled with a single word: Mire. Inside were screenshots of encrypted messages, long chains of numbers and code, dates that stretched back over a year, and maps marked with red pins, coordinates, places they had never visited. A list of names, some crossed out, some highlighted, and near the end, a scanned image of Calden's face, only it was dated 2 years before he moved in. He looked the same, but the name beneath wasn't Calden Mire. It was Elias Rohn. That was when Nolan realized Selena might have known exactly who he was, that maybe she hadn't just fallen into something by accident, but had been following someone, tracking something. Perhaps she had been investigating Elias, or perhaps she had been working with him. Either way, Nolan knew the truth was buried deeper than anyone suspected. And the story wasn't over, because the last file on the drive was a single video, time-stamped. 3 days before she disappeared, and she was looking directly into the camera, smiling, whispering something Nolan couldn't hear. Yet,